Here's the horrible truth about professional wrestling that the industry doesn't want you to know. While the storylines are fake, the risk of death is terrifyingly real. What you're about to hear are stories of wrestlers who came within inches of losing their lives, not just from freak accidents, but from an industry culture that has consistently put spectacle over human safety. These aren't just cautionary tales. These are the moments that forced wrestling to confront its own deadly obsessions. But even more disturbing is how the industry only changes after someone nearly dies or actually dies. Professional wrestling exists in a fascinating paradox, a predetermined performance where the physical stakes are intensely real. While storylines are scripted, the risks of spinal trauma, traumatic brain injuries, and internal damage are unscripted and ever-present. The physical demands include high-impact movements, throws, and falls that put immense and cumulative strain on the human body. These near-death experiences are not isolated misfortunes, but critical junctures that have consistently forced the wrestling industry to confront its own vulnerabilities. Let's start with the most infamous near-death experience in wrestling history. June 28, 1998, Hell in a Cell, Mick Foley versus The Undertaker. What happened that night wasn't just wrestling. It was a glimpse into how far the industry was willing to push human beings for entertainment. This wasn't an accident. This was the inevitable result of a performance culture where wrestlers were pressured to constantly top themselves for spectacle. Foley, performing as Mankind, climbed to the top of a 16-foot steel cage. The plan was supposedly simple, a controlled spot, an elbow drop from the top. But wrestling has a way of turning plans into nightmares. The Undertaker grabbed Foley and hurled him off the structure. Foley crashed through a Spanish announce table below, with a sickening thud that echoed through the arena. The injuries were catastrophic and extensive. Severe concussion, dislocated jaw, dislocated shoulder, bruised ribs, internal bleeding. But here's where the story gets truly disturbing. After being placed on a stretcher, Foley defiantly climbed back up to the top of the cage. Why? Because in wrestling culture, surviving one near-death experience means you need to top it with another. The initial plan was for a more standard elbow drop from the cage top, but the match escalated into a spontaneous and unprecedented act of violence. The Undertaker chokeslammed him through the cage roof onto the ring below. The ring was covered in thumbtacks, thousands of them. Foley landed face first into a bed of metal spikes. His body was mangled beyond recognition. Countless puncture wounds covered his flesh. And in perhaps the most horrifying detail of all, doctors later found one of his teeth lodged in his nostril from the initial fall. Think about the force required to drive a tooth through flesh and cartilage into a nasal cavity. Think about the impact that could cause such grotesque bodily damage. But Foley wasn't done. Despite being so concussed that his cognitive function was completely compromised, he insisted he was good to go. He finished the match. He later apologized backstage for not using all the thumbtacks, even though they were literally pouring out of his mangled body. His wife's emotional reaction during a post-match phone call briefly made him consider retirement, but only briefly. Foley saw the first, near-fatal fall as an opportunity to continue and top it with the second. This reveals a pre-policy mindset where creating an unforgettable moment was prioritized over athlete welfare. His backstage state was so concussed that he apologized for not using the thumbtacks that were pouring out of his mangled body. This is a chilling illustration of how traumatic brain injuries can disorient a person's cognitive function. This wasn't heroism. This was a culture of sickness. A performance environment where wrestlers were pressured to constantly top themselves, where creating an unforgettable moment was more important than preserving human life. It highlights a deeply ingrained culture of toughness, where performers, even with severe neurological trauma, feel obligated to finish a match and satisfy the crowd. The physical toll lasted for years. Chronic pain became Foley's constant companion. The psychological trauma affected his family permanently. His wife lived in terror every time he stepped through the ropes. The incident inflicted a long-lasting physical and psychological toll on both the performer and his family. But the industry? They turned it into marketing material. They sold the footage. They promoted the violence. They made millions off Mick Foley's near-death experience. Foley's falls were a consequence of a performance culture that demanded constant escalation. The fact that he saw surviving massive trauma as a reason to inflict more trauma on himself shows how twisted wrestling's value system had become. This wasn't just a good spot. It was evidence of an industry that had lost all perspective on the value of human life. Now let's talk about an incident that proved even the safest wrestling moves can kill you. 2015 Tyson Kidd, a wrestler known for his technical ability and safe working style. He was having a dark match against Samoa Joe. The move was called a muscle buster. It was considered routine, safe, something both men had done hundreds of times without incident. But wrestling doesn't care about your experience. It doesn't care about your reputation for safety. It doesn't care about your technical skill. One slight miscalculation and your life is over. One tiny adjustment in timing or positioning and everything changes forever. The move went wrong, catastrophically wrong. Kidd suffered a spinal cord injury at the C1 and C2 vertebrae, the most dangerous area of the spine, the area that controls your ability to breathe, to move, to live. The medical prognosis was devastating and immediate. Doctors gave him only a 5% chance of ever walking again, a 10% chance of survival. In his own harrowing account, a nurse told him he should have suffocated to death on impact. She said 99% of people who survive similar injuries are quadriplegic for life. Think about that for a moment. A routine move, an experienced wrestler, a controlled environment, and still Tyson Kidd came within seconds of dying in that ring. His miraculous survival and recovery led him to return to WWE as a producer, a safe role, behind the scenes, away from the ring that nearly killed him. But his wrestling career was over forever. His dreams of in-ring competition were ended by what should have been the safest move of the night. Kidd's injury serves as a powerful counterpoint to Mick Foley's story. It demonstrates that even in a highly controlled environment with experienced performers, the risk of catastrophic injury is a constant variable that cannot be fully mitigated. It forces the audience and the industry to recognize that scripted does not equate to safe. His personal account reveals a profound psychological reckoning. The nurse's stark prognosis brought him right back to reality and forced him to confront his own mortality. His decision to remain retired, despite the desires of fans, shows the self-preservation that must override the performer's instincts. This was a difficult lesson learned from the profound psychological cost of the injury. Kidd's story forced fans in the industry to confront an uncomfortable reality. Scripted doesn't mean safe. Experience doesn't guarantee survival. Technical skill doesn't eliminate risk. Every single time a wrestler steps through those ropes, they're gambling with their life. And sometimes, even when you do everything right, the house wins. The psychological impact was just as devastating as the physical injuries. Kidd had to reckon with his own mortality at a young age. He had to accept that his dreams of wrestling greatness were over, that his identity as a performer had been stolen by a move that was supposed to be safe. His decision to stay retired, despite fan requests for a comeback, showed the kind of self-preservation that wrestling culture actively discourages. But perhaps no injury in wrestling history had a more direct impact on industry policy than what happened to Stone Cold Steve Austin at SummerSlam 1997. Austin was at the height of his popularity, the biggest star in wrestling, the face of the company, untouchable, until Owen Hart delivered a piledriver that changed everything forever. The move was botched completely. Austin's neck snapped with a sound that could be heard throughout the arena. He was temporarily paralyzed in the ring, couldn't feel his arms or legs, couldn't move his fingers or toes. For a terrifying moment, it looked like wrestling had claimed another victim. The crowd fell silent as they realized they might be witnessing a man's death. But Austin, in what can only be described as superhuman determination and sheer force of will, regained feeling and finished the match. The image of Austin lying motionless in that ring became seared into wrestling history, not because it was a great match, but because it showed how quickly everything could go wrong, how a single mistake could end a career, end a life. Austin's neck injury didn't just affect him personally, it forced WWE to make their first major safety policy change in company history. The piledriver was banned, restricted to only veteran performers with established finishing moves. This was the first time in wrestling history that a single injury led to an institutional change in allowed maneuvers. The move is still considered an automatic disqualification in certain jurisdictions, such as Tennessee, and remains highly regulated even in other promotions. This policy change was a direct response to a single, high-profile injury and established a precedent for future risk mitigation. It represented a conscious decision by the organization to prioritize safety over a signature maneuver that was both popular and dangerous. But here's the truly disturbing part about Austin's situation. His neck was already damaged from years of taking hard bumps. The Owen Hart botch wasn't the cause of his problems, it was the final straw. His body had been breaking down for years from the relentless physical abuse. The industry had been slowly killing him with every match, every fall, every impact. The piledriver just finished the job that years of accumulated damage had started. Further analysis reveals that the piledriver was not the sole cause of Austin's retirement. His neck was already in poor condition from years of taking hard bumps. The Owen Hart botch was the final straw for a body already worn down by relentless physical abuse. This demonstrates the compounding nature of risk in a profession where a single event can trigger a crisis that has been building for years. Austin retired early in 2003. His neck couldn't take any more punishment. One of wrestling's biggest stars was forced out of the ring by the cumulative damage of a career built on violence. The piledriver ban was too little, too late. It saved future wrestlers, but it couldn't save Austin from the years of damage that came before. It couldn't undo the systematic destruction of his spine that wrestling had inflicted over decades. Austin's injury is perhaps the clearest example of a direct cause and effect relationship in wrestling history. The incident led directly to the institutional restriction and eventual ban of the piledriver within WWE. This demonstrates that a singular high-profile injury can force an organization to prioritize safety over a signature maneuver, establishing a powerful precedent for future policy changes. Now let's venture into the truly dark corners of wrestling, the independent circuit, the deathmatch scene, where the line between performance and genuine violence doesn't just blur, it disappears completely. Where wrestlers are forced to engage in performances of extreme, often lethal violence just to get noticed and make a living. New Jack versus Vic Grimes, XPW Freefall 2002, a 40-foot scaffold match. Two men fighting high above the ring with no safety net, no protection, and apparently no regard for human life. The match ended with New Jack tasering Grimes and throwing him off the structure in what can only be described as an attempted murder disguised as entertainment. What happened next depends on who you ask, but the truth is equally disturbing either way. New Jack claimed he was intentionally trying to kill Grimes, revenge for a past botch. He said it proudly often, as part of his controversial persona. He claimed he was trying to throw Grimes headfirst at the ring post to kill him. Others believe it was a botched spot that New Jack exploited for his own narrative after the fact. The truth doesn't really matter. What matters is the result. What matters is that XPW was operating with fake insurance papers, fake protection for their wrestlers. When the inevitable lawsuit came, it drove the company out of business completely. The financial toll of the lawsuit eventually destroyed the promotion entirely. This exposed the Wild West nature of wrestling outside major promotions. Places where wrestlers were left without any safety net whatsoever, where they were forced to engage in increasingly extreme, often lethal violence just to get noticed, just to make a living, just to have a chance at moving up to bigger promotions. The industry created a system where wrestlers had to risk their lives for the smallest paychecks and the slimmest chance at stardom. The legal and moral ambiguity of the incident remains a point of contention. Many observers, including wrestlers and fans, believe it was a botched spot that New Jack exploited for his own narrative. Regardless of intent, the incident resulted in a lawsuit that exposed the perilous lack of oversight in such promotions. This exposes the dangerous Wild West of professional wrestling outside of major promotions, where the line between performance and genuine malice can dissolve completely. It also highlights a significant systemic failure in the industry's independent circuit, where athletes are left without a safety net and are forced to engage in performances of extreme, often lethal violence to get noticed. In another deathmatch horror story, Nick Gage suffered an injury so severe that it defies belief and challenges everything we think we know about human survival. A bump onto a light tube severed an artery in his arm. The blood loss was massive, immediate, and life-threatening. Gage was clinically dead for several minutes before medical personnel managed to revive him. Think about that. Clinically dead. In a wrestling ring. For entertainment. For the amusement of a few hundred fans in a gymnasium. This is what the deathmatch scene normalized. This is what wrestling culture created. An environment where death was not just possible, but expected. Where wrestlers were willing to die for the approval of bloodthirsty crowds. This event, like so many others, underscored the inherent and often unpredictable dangers of extreme wrestling styles. These incidents underscore the dangerous, often unpredictable nature of extreme wrestling, but they also reveal something darker. They show an industry that has consistently failed to protect its performers, that has created a culture where taking insane risks is not just accepted, but demanded. The deathmatch scene represents wrestling at its most honest and most horrifying. No pretense of sport, no illusion of safety, just pure violence for the sake of violence. And when wrestlers get hurt, when they die, the response is always the same. It's part of the business. They knew what they were getting into, as if that somehow makes it acceptable. But the dangers of wrestling don't end when the match is over. The lifestyle itself has claimed just as many victims as any botched move or extreme stunt. The relentless travel, pressure to perform, and a culture of substance abuse and physical resilience have led to numerous near-fatal health crises and accidents. In 2021, Triple H suffered a cardiac event that ended his in-ring career forever. Paul Levesque suffered a serious cardiac event that forced his retirement. A genetic heart condition, worsened by viral pneumonia, led to bad heart failure. He later described being at the 1-yard line of where you don't want to be, a terrifying metaphor for how close he came to death. The condition required a life-saving procedure and the permanent implantation of a defibrillator, a medical device that makes a return to the ring impossible due to the life-threatening risk of a shock during live performance. The defibrillator made a return to wrestling impossible. The device could deliver a shock during a match that would be life-threatening. Triple H's career was over, not because of a botched move or a freak accident, but because of the long-term cardiovascular damage caused by decades of physical punishment. While his heart condition was genetic, the relentless physical demands of a wrestling career almost certainly accelerated the problem. The relentless, decades-long physical exertion of a wrestling career likely exacerbated and accelerated the issue. This points to a silent killer in wrestling, not the dramatic falls or the chair shots, but the cumulative stress on a performer's cardiovascular system. The constant travel, the physical demands, the pressure to perform while injured. This points to a silent but deadly professional hazard that is not as visually dramatic as an in-ring spot, but is just as dangerous. The immense long-term stress on a performer's cardiovascular system. Unlike performers who have wrestled through severe pain or made miraculous comebacks, Triple H's retirement was a clear, unequivocal medical decision. Triple H's retirement was final. Unequivocal. Medical science had made the decision for him. Unlike other wrestlers who fought through injuries or made miraculous comebacks, there was no debate here, no comeback story, no defying the odds. Just a man whose body could no longer handle what wrestling had put it through. The defibrillator implant provides a stark example of a career ending, not by a single botch, but by the cumulative, internal toll of the profession. This reinforces the need for continuous medical oversight and a reevaluation of the long-term physical demands placed on athletes. His story reinforced the need for continuous medical oversight and a serious reevaluation of the physical demands placed on wrestlers. In 1975, Ric Flair's career almost ended before it truly began. A plane crash in Wilmington, North Carolina, that changed everything. The pilot was killed instantly. 2 other wrestlers on the plane were paralyzed for life. Flair suffered a broken back in 3 places, 3 separate fractures in his spine. Doctors told the 26-year-old that he would never wrestle again, that his dreams were over before they had really begun. But Flair defied the prognosis through sheer determination and probably a fair amount of luck. He returned to the ring just months later. However, the crash forced a complete reinvention of his character and wrestling style. The physical limitations from his broken back meant he could no longer rely on his power brawling style. He had to become more technical, more focused on showmanship, more reliant on psychology than pure physicality. This life-threatening incident forced a profound creative reinvention. The crash created the Nature Boy persona that would define his legendary career. The accident was a direct result of the relentless travel schedule that defines wrestling life. A schedule that forces wrestlers to constantly move from city to city, often in unsafe conditions with inadequate rest. The crash was caused by human error, with the pilot having dumped fuel to compensate for the plane being overgrossed with the wrestler's weight. This highlights that the dangers weren't confined to the ring. They were a constant, ambient threat on the road. Every flight, every drive, every hotel stay carried risks that most people never have to consider. The crash, a near-fatal incident, paradoxically created his enduring legacy. But it shouldn't overshadow the fact that the industry's travel demands nearly killed him, that 2 other wrestlers were paralyzed, that the constant pressure to get from city to city, show to show, created the conditions for the crash in the first place. The relentless travel schedule inherent in the wrestling industry created the dangerous conditions that led to the crash. Flair's survival and reinvention became wrestling legend, a story of triumph over adversity. But the real story is how wrestling's impossible demands nearly claimed 3 lives and permanently destroyed 2 others. How an industry built on entertaining people created conditions so dangerous that a routine flight became a death trap. Perhaps no story better illustrates the lifestyle dangers of wrestling than Eddie Guerrero's 1998 car crash, an incident that reveals wrestling's greatest danger. Not the physical moves, but the psychological and lifestyle pressures that lead to self-destructive behavior. After a fight with his wife, Guerrero drove off at 130 miles per hour after taking 5 capfuls of GHB, a drug that promotes muscle building but also causes users to pass out. He fell asleep at the wheel while traveling at highway speed. His car went off an embankment, rolling multiple times and flattening like a Coke can. The vehicle was completely destroyed. Guerrero later admitted in his autobiography that the incident was a subconscious suicide attempt, driven by struggles with addiction and a sense of hopelessness that wrestling culture had created and normalized. His survival was miraculous. He was ejected from the car during the rolling, which saved his life since the vehicle was completely crushed. But the crash revealed wrestling's greatest danger. Not the physical moves, but the psychological and lifestyle pressures that lead to self-destructive behavior. The incident reveals that the wrestling industry's greatest dangers are not always physical moves, but the psychological and lifestyle pressures that lead to self-destructive behavior. The long, lonely hours on the road, the pressure to maintain a certain physique through any means necessary, the constant pain from accumulated injuries. All of it contributed to an environment where substance abuse was rampant and normalized, where wrestlers turned to drugs not just for performance enhancement, but for basic psychological survival. The long, lonely hours on the road, the pressure to maintain a certain physique, and the constant pain all contributed to an environment where substance abuse was rampant and often normalized. Wrestlers were expected to maintain their bodies and their sanity while living a lifestyle that systematically destroyed both. Guerrero's 1998 crash was a direct precursor to his death in 2005. The dependence on painkillers he developed after the accident became part of a broader addiction that eventually claimed his life. The 1998 car crash was a direct precursor to the fatal heart failure that claimed his life in 2005. The dependence on painkillers he developed after the accident and the broader addiction issues that led to his temporary release from WWE were a direct line to his eventual death. The institutional response, the WWE wellness policy, came years too late. Only after the tragedy became unavoidable. This shows that the institutional response was a reactive measure that came years too late. Only after a tragedy became unavoidable. The industry had years to address the lifestyle pressures that nearly killed Guerrero in 1998, but chose to ignore them until it was too late. These individual stories of near-death experiences have forced the wrestling industry to implement changes, but the pattern is always the same. Always reactive, never proactive. Always after someone nearly dies or actually dies, never before. The wrestling industry's most significant safety reforms have been a reactive, rather than a proactive, response to tragedy. The piledriver ban came after Austin's neck injury, a direct cause and effect relationship that established a precedent for future safety measures. It represented a conscious decision to prioritize safety over a popular but dangerous move. But it took a major star being paralyzed to make it happen. The direct link between Stone Cold Steve Austin's neck injury and the institutional move to ban or restrict the piledriver within WWE is a key example of cause and effect in the industry's evolution. The move is still considered an automatic disqualification in certain jurisdictions and remains highly regulated even in other promotions. This policy change established a precedent for future risk mitigation. It represented a conscious decision by the organization to prioritize safety over a signature maneuver that was both popular and dangerous. The most significant shift came after the Chris Benoit tragedy in 2007. The discovery of chronic traumatic encephalopathy in his brain led to a fundamental change in how wrestling approaches concussions. The tragic murder-suicide led to the discovery of CTE in his brain. This diagnosis, along with the subsequent research into brain trauma, catalyzed a monumental change in the industry's approach to concussions. Modern protocols now include immediate removal from competition if a concussion is suspected, extended evaluation time with medical personnel, rules for season termination after multiple concussions. This represented a crucial shift from a culture of shaking it off to one that prioritizes long-term neurological health. But again, it took a murder-suicide and the discovery of severe brain damage to force the change. The efforts of former wrestler Christopher Nowinski, who co-founded the Concussion Legacy Foundation, have been instrumental in this movement. Modern protocols, particularly in amateur and scholastic wrestling, now include immediate removal from a match if a concussion is suspected, extended evaluation time with certified medical personnel, and the imposition of a terminate season rule after multiple concussions. This represents a crucial shift from a culture of shaking it off to one that prioritizes long-term neurological health, driven by scientific research and legal pressure from class action lawsuits. How many wrestlers suffered in silence before Benoit's tragedy made CTE impossible to ignore? How many careers were shortened or ended by brain damage that could have been prevented? The WWE wellness policy was introduced in the mid-2000s, directly following Eddie Guerrero's death from heart failure. The policy included drug testing and health screenings with a 3 strikes rule leading to termination. A framework for drug testing and health screenings was introduced directly following the sudden death of Eddie Guerrero in 2005 from heart failure. The policy's initial framework included strict penalties for drug violations, with a three-strikes rule leading to termination. But even this policy has reportedly been modified over time. The reported changes to the policy, where the three-strikes termination rule has been modified, demonstrate a persistent tension between a public company's need to protect its assets and its stated commitment to athlete welfare. This shows the persistent tension between protecting wrestlers and protecting business interests. This shows that the struggle for athlete security is ongoing and often conflicts with the demands of the business. The industry talks about caring for its performers, but when push comes to shove, business interests often win out. These policy changes reveal a disturbing pattern that cannot be ignored or excused. The wrestling industry only acts when forced to by tragedy, when the consequences become so severe that ignoring them threatens the business itself. Not because the industry suddenly developed a conscience, but because legal pressure and public outcry demanded change. The pattern is clear and undeniable. The piledriver ban followed Austin's broken neck. The wellness policy was instituted after Eddie Guerrero's death. Concussion protocols gained traction in the wake of the Benoit tragedy and the broader scientific inquiry into CTE. This highlights a fundamental challenge within the industry, where the drive for spectacle and business interests often take precedence over athlete welfare until a catastrophic event forces a change. The dangers of professional wrestling extend far beyond what fans see on television. The in-ring action is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface is a culture that has consistently prioritized entertainment over human life, that has created an environment where taking insane risks is not just accepted, but demanded. The dangers of the profession are not confined to the ring. They are an inherent part of the grueling travel schedules, the pressure to maintain a certain physique, and a culture that has historically normalized substance abuse and working through excruciating pain. The travel schedules are punishing and often dangerous. The physical demands are extreme and cumulative. The pressure to perform while injured is constant and unrelenting. The normalization of substance abuse is endemic throughout the industry. The lack of long-term medical care is systematic and deliberate. These aren't accidents or oversights. They're features of an industry that has built its success on the physical destruction of human beings. The wrestlers who almost died are not anomalies or unfortunate exceptions. They're predictable outcomes of a system designed to extract maximum entertainment value from human suffering. Their stories aren't inspiring tales of overcoming adversity. They're evidence of institutional failure on a massive scale. They're proof that the industry has always known the cost of its spectacle and has chosen to pay it with other people's bodies. The stories of wrestlers who almost died are not just cautionary tales. They are a testament to human resilience and a roadmap of an industry's painful and necessary evolution. But they're also an indictment of a system that has consistently failed to protect the people who make it possible. Mick Foley's tooth in his nostril, the image of thumbtacks pouring from his mangled body, Tyson Kidd's miraculous survival from a routine move that should have killed him, Austin's paralysis from a botched piledriver and the years of accumulated damage that preceded it, New Jack's attempted murder disguised as entertainment, Triple H's heart failure from decades of punishment, Ric Flair's broken back from industry travel demands, Eddie Guerrero's drug-fueled suicide attempt from lifestyle pressures. Each of these incidents forced changes in the industry, but always after the fact, always too late for the victims. The industry learned, but only after extracting the maximum possible cost in human suffering. Only after the damage was done and the lives were ruined. While significant strides have been made in athlete welfare, the inherent paradox of a scripted yet physically brutal sport remains. Wrestling is scripted entertainment where the outcomes are predetermined, but the blood is real, the pain is real, the injuries are real, the deaths are real. The industry has spent decades perfecting the illusion of violence while inflicting genuine damage on its performers. The policy changes that emerge from these tragedies represent progress, but they also represent the industry's consistent pattern of reactive rather than proactive safety measures. The piledriver ban probably saved careers. The concussion protocols probably prevented brain damage. The wellness policy probably saved lives, but they also represent failure. Failure to act before tragedy struck. Failure to prioritize human life over entertainment value. How many near-death experiences could have been prevented if the industry had prioritized safety from the beginning? How many wrestlers would still be active today if proper medical oversight had existed decades ago? How many families would still be intact if wrestling culture hadn't normalized substance abuse and working through devastating injuries? How many deaths could have been prevented if the industry had acted proactively instead of reactively? These are uncomfortable questions that the wrestling industry would prefer to avoid, because the answers reveal an uncomfortable truth that threatens the very foundation of the business. The spectacle that fans love has always come at an enormous human cost. The entertainment value has always been built on genuine suffering. The scripted outcomes have always required unscripted sacrifice. The wrestlers who almost died are not heroes for surviving, though their resilience is undeniable. They're victims of a system that failed them in the most fundamental way possible. Their resilience shouldn't overshadow the institutional negligence that put them in danger in the first place. Their survival story shouldn't be used to justify the culture that nearly killed them. Professional wrestling exists in a paradox that defines everything about it. Scripted outcomes with unscripted consequences, predetermined winners with unpredictable injuries, fake storylines with real suffering, controlled narratives with uncontrollable human costs. This paradox has defined the industry since its inception and continues to define it today. The concluding question for the industry and its audience is a difficult one. At what point is the pursuit of spectacle outweighed by the inherent cost to the human body? How will the industry continue to navigate this delicate balance in the future? The question facing wrestling moving forward is whether it can maintain its entertainment value while genuinely prioritizing performer safety. Can wrestling create spectacle without requiring human sacrifice? Can it evolve beyond its reactive approach to safety and become truly proactive in protecting its athletes? Can it break the cycle of waiting for tragedy before implementing change? These questions will define the future of the industry and determine whether the lessons learned from past tragedies will actually stick. The wrestlers who almost died have shown us the cost of failure in the starkest terms possible. They've paid the price for an industry that has consistently put business interests ahead of human welfare. Their stories serve as both warning and inspiration. Warning of what happens when safety is secondary. Inspiration for what the industry could become if it genuinely prioritized the people who make it possible. Wrestling is scripted, but death is always real. The challenge for the industry is ensuring that entertainment never again comes at the cost of human life. The wrestlers who almost died deserve better than being remembered as cautionary tales. Current wrestlers deserve better than risking their lives for entertainment. Future wrestlers deserve better than inheriting a system built on human sacrifice. The horrible truth about professional wrestling is that it has always known the cost of its spectacle. It has always understood the risks its performers face. It has always been aware of the human price of entertainment. But for too long, it chose entertainment over safety, profit over people, spectacle over human life. For too long, it has treated human beings as disposable commodities in the pursuit of entertainment. The near-death experiences we've discussed today represent a reckoning. Moments when the industry was forced to confront its own deadly obsessions, moments when the cost became too high to ignore, moments when change became inevitable, not by choice, but by necessity. But the question that haunts the industry is whether these lessons will stick or whether wrestling will continue its pattern of reactive safety measures only after tragedy strikes. Will the industry learn to value human life before it's too late, or will it continue to wait for the next tragedy to force the next change? The answer to that question will determine not just the future of wrestling, but the future of everyone who steps into a wrestling ring. The wrestlers who almost died have shown us what's at stake. The question is whether their suffering will finally be enough to change an industry that has resisted change for far too long. What do you think? Is the spectacle worth the risk? Has wrestling done enough to protect its performers? Or does the industry still have blood on its hands? Are these reforms genuine progress or just public relations moves designed to deflect criticism? Let me know in the comments below what you think about wrestling's approach to safety. And if this video opened your eyes to the darker side of wrestling, make sure to like and subscribe for more content that pulls back the curtain on sports entertainment. Share this video with other wrestling fans who need to understand the real cost of the shows they love. Because until fans demand better, until viewers refuse to accept human sacrifice as entertainment, the industry will continue to prioritize spectacle over human life. The power to change wrestling doesn't just lie with the industry, it lies with all of us.